Breaking. BBC journalists just leaked classified audio recordings exposing Keir Starmer's secret media control programme that violates press freedom laws. Dozens of journalists under government surveillance for narrative correction. And what happened next ignited the largest press freedom crisis in British history. Armed police raided the BBC at 4:37 a.m. today, confiscating equipment and detaining reporters. Your right to know the truth hangs in the balance. If you want to understand how this unprecedented censorship threatens British democracy, hit subscribe now because this story will be suppressed before nightfall. Here's what sparked this extraordinary crisis. At 11:23 p.m. yesterday, 3 senior BBC journalists simultaneously published 74 minutes of classified recordings to an encrypted server. The audio contained 6 separate government meetings where Starmer and his communications team discussed managing problematic journalists and narrative correction protocols. These weren't typical press relations discussions. They were explicit strategies to monitor, pressure, and silence journalists critical of government policies. The recordings captured Cabinet Office officials naming specific reporters at The Guardian, Telegraph, and BBC who required special handling. Within 90 minutes, the files spread to newsrooms across Britain. But something alarming happened next. Rather than addressing the content, the government immediately classified the recordings as national security materials. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper signed emergency orders authorising police to recover stolen classified materials from media organisations. That decision would trigger the most severe press freedom crisis in modern British history. When armed Metropolitan Police officers entered BBC headquarters at 4:37 a.m., senior editors were still meeting to verify the recording's authenticity. The raid was not announced. Security footage shows 23 officers, some with tactical weapons, entering through 3 separate entrances. Their exact words to BBC staff were chilling. By order of the Home Secretary, surrender all copies of classified government communications or face arrest under the Official Secrets Act. Laura Kuenssberg, veteran political editor, immediately began live streaming on her phone. This is unprecedented in modern Britain, she declared as officers approached. They're seizing journalistic materials without warrants specific to press organisations. The stream abruptly ended as officers confiscated her phone. BBC Director General Tim Davie attempted to prevent officers accessing the newsroom by physically standing in the doorway, declaring, "This is a protected journalistic space under law." Officers physically moved him aside. By 5:15 a.m., police had seized 14 computers, 23 phones, and multiple servers. When legal representatives arrived at 5:42 a.m., brandishing emergency court filings, the commanding officer stated, "National security directives supersede normal press protections." Guardian editor Catherine Viner watched the BBC raid via security cameras and immediately ordered her journalists to secure their copies of the recordings off-site. Within hours, similar raids began at 5 other news organisations across London. The National Union of Journalists issued an emergency statement. Today marks the darkest day for press freedom in Britain since World War II censorship. By 8 a.m. number press freedom and number BBC raid were trending globally. The government's heavy-handed response had transformed a political scandal into a constitutional crisis. Inside Parliament, even loyal Labour MPs watched in stunned disbelief as footage of journalists being detained spread across social media. The opposition called for an emergency debate on press freedom. The Speaker granted the request within minutes, an extraordinarily rapid response reflecting the gravity of events. Meanwhile, ordinary British citizens who value their democratic freedoms are watching in absolute horror as their government raids news organisations like authoritarian regimes they've condemned. Elizabeth Thompson, a 64-year-old retired teacher from Birmingham, organised an impromptu demonstration outside her local BBC studio. Her handwritten sign reading "Defend Press Freedom" was photographed and shared hundreds of thousands of times. "I grew up being taught Britain had free speech and free press," Thompson told reporters, her voice breaking with emotion. "I never thought I'd see armed police raiding the BBC in my lifetime." Her sentiment reflects growing public outrage. While government ministers insist the raids are about protecting classified information, leaked internal emails show officials specifically targeting journalists who had recently published articles critical of government policies. The contrast is so stark, so fundamentally disturbing, that even traditional Labour voters are expressing profound concern. William Davies, 71, a Labour Party member for 45 years, told Sky News, "This isn't the Labour Party I've supported my entire life. We're supposed to defend democratic institutions, not attack them." His interview has been viewed 5.2 million times since this morning. While Starmer's inner circle discusses controlling the narrative in leaked recordings, ordinary citizens face the reality of a government willing to use security services against journalists. Former BBC correspondents who covered authoritarian regimes have been particularly vocal, with Martin Bell stating, "I reported from countries where this happened to journalists. I never imagined it happening at the BBC." Meanwhile, at an emergency cabinet meeting at 7:30 a.m, ministers were reportedly instructed to describe the scandal as a national security matter, not a press freedom issue. In all public statements, the contrast between public concern and government messaging couldn't be more pronounced. Then something unprecedented happened that nobody saw coming. At 10:15 a.m, former prime ministers from across the political spectrum released a joint statement condemning the raids. Boris Johnson, Theresa May, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair and John Major, politicians who rarely agree on anything, stood united against the government's actions. Their statement was devastating. "Whatever political differences exist between us, we are unanimous that press freedom is fundamental to British democracy. The use of security services against journalists represents a dangerous overreach of executive power." Constitutional experts immediately recognised the significance. Professor Richard Harrington of Oxford called it the most extraordinary cross-party rebuke of a sitting government in modern times. The joint statement continued with a particularly damning passage. "Britain cannot credibly advocate for press freedom internationally while undermining it at home." Former judges from the Supreme Court also broke their traditional silence on political matters. Lady Hale, former president of the Supreme Court, issued a personal statement expressing grave concerns about the apparent circumvention of legal protections for journalistic material. Within minutes of these interventions, "Number resign" Starmer began trending nationally. The optics are catastrophic for the government. While ministers attempt to justify raids on news organisations, former leaders from their own party stand with the press. International reaction was equally damaging. The European Commission expressed serious concerns about press freedom in the UK and demanded immediate explanations. The UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression issued a statement that Britain was witnessing actions incompatible with democratic norms. The US State Department spokesperson, when asked about the situation, notably declined to defend the UK government, stating only that press freedom is a fundamental value that all democracies must uphold. Government whips were reportedly blindsided by this unified response, having expected the national security justification to receive greater deference. The political impact was immediate and severe. The pound dropped 1.7% against the dollar as international markets reacted to the governance crisis. Media freedom organisations worldwide downgraded Britain's press freedom rating, with Reporters Without Borders issuing an emergency notification. Inside Westminster, party discipline collapsed completely. 42 Labour MPs signed an open letter expressing profound concern about the government's actions against journalists. Former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell broke ranks completely, telling Channel 4, "This is not what the Labour Party stands for. We should be defending press freedom, not attacking it." Cabinet unity fractured visibly. Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy reportedly threatened resignation unless police actions against journalists ceased immediately. Foreign Office ministers expressed alarm that Britain's moral authority on press freedom internationally was irreparably damaged. Government WhatsApp messages leaked to The Times reveal panic at the highest levels. "We've completely miscalculated," wrote one senior advisor. "This looks like something from Moscow, not London." The international reaction intensified throughout the day. The International Press Institute activated its emergency monitoring protocol, typically reserved for press freedom crises in authoritarian states. The Committee to Protect Journalists placed Britain on its Countries of Concern watch list, the first Western European nation to appear since the list's creation. Social media exploded with unprecedented unity among journalists from competing organisations. Hashtags like #Defend Press Freedom and #Journalism is not a crime trended globally for 14 consecutive hours. YouGov polling showed devastating public opinion. 76% of respondents opposed the government's actions against journalists, including 68% of Labour voters. Street demonstrations supporting press freedom erupted in 19 cities across Britain. Outside Broadcasting House, thousands gathered with hastily made signs reading "Defend the BBC," an extraordinary show of support for an institution often criticised from both left and right. The National Union of Journalists reported that 97% of members supported industrial action if prosecutions of journalists proceeded. Inside Downing Street, absolute chaos has erupted. Ministers are openly arguing about responsibility for the escalating crisis. Attorney General Shabana Mahmood has reportedly warned the Prime Minister that prosecuting journalists would likely fail in court and damage the government further. Cabinet Secretary Simon Case was overheard telling staff, "This has become politically toxic. Nobody wants to defend it publicly. WhatsApp groups with names like crisis management and damage control are filled with recriminations and blame shifting." Senior civil servants describe profound discomfort with implementing orders against news organisations. 3 special advisors have already resigned, including the head of government communications, who reportedly told colleagues he would not participate in press intimidation. Labour's parliamentary private secretaries are in open revolt, with 7 already resigning their positions in protest. The government faces a stark choice: withdraw all actions against journalists immediately or face potential collapse of parliamentary support. Momentum, the left-wing Labour group, issued a statement that the raids betray core Labour values of democracy and transparency. The shadow cabinet from the previous Conservative government has requested an emergency Privy Council briefing, suggesting they view the matter as transcending normal political opposition. Media teams across government departments have essentially stopped functioning, with press officers refusing to defend the raids in communications. Veteran Labour MP Harriet Harman didn't mince words. "In 40 years in Parliament, I've never seen a government action so fundamentally at odds with our democratic traditions. This must be reversed immediately." But here's the bombshell that could destroy Starmer's government permanently. The leaked recordings reveal ministers discussing using anti-terrorism powers against routine journalistic activities. The most damaging section, verified by voice analysis experts and published by The Telegraph at 2:30 p.m. today, captures the Prime Minister himself discussing specific journalists by name. James Matthews at Sky keeps pushing the migration numbers. Starmer is heard saying, "We need enhanced monitoring of his communications to identify his sources." Another voice, identified as the Director of Communications, suggests, "The counter-terrorism powers give us legal coverage to do that without the normal press protections getting in the way. If these recordings are kosher, if these recordings are of authentic and all technical analysis confirms they are, then the government deliberately misused security powers designed for terrorism to monitor legitimate journalistic activities." Think about what that means. While publicly championing press freedom, ministers were privately weaponizing security services against reporters for routine political coverage. The optics are absolutely devastating. Not just political overreach, but fundamental hostility to core democratic principles. According to sources within the civil service, senior legal advisors repeatedly warned that such actions were likely unlawful and constitutionally inappropriate. The recordings allegedly capture one security official expressing concern about potential legal exposure, only to be told by a political appointee. "That's why we classify everything as national security, to provide legal cover." One senior civil servant reportedly told colleagues, "This goes beyond politics. This is an assault on constitutional norms that protect democracy itself." Britain stands on the precipice of its most serious governance crisis since the 2009 expenses scandal, with potential legal consequences that could extend far beyond political damage. Meanwhile, opposition parties are executing masterful responses to the crisis. While Labour implodes, Conservative leader Rishi Sunak addressed the nation from in front of Parliament, positioning himself as the defender of press freedom. There are moments when opposition must give way to defending fundamental national values, he declared. Today, press freedom needs defenders from across the political spectrum. The contrast couldn't be more striking. A government raiding newsrooms versus opposition parties standing with journalists. The polls tell the devastating story. Labour's approval rating has collapsed from 47% to just 32% in less than 24 hours. Conservative support has risen to 38%, their highest level since before the election. Most alarming for Starmer. Detailed polling shows catastrophic collapse among educated professionals, the demographic most concerned with democratic norms and institutional integrity. Political historians call this the most significant self-inflicted government crisis since the Iraq War. At 3:15 p.m. today, a cross-party group of 118 MPs, including 37 Labour members, signed a motion condemning the actions against journalists and demanding immediate cessation of all legal actions against news organisations. This represents the largest rebellion Starmer has faced since taking office. For the first time, serious questions are being raised about whether he can survive as Prime Minister if the crisis continues to escalate. Shadow cabinet elections, typically a formality, suddenly appear potentially competitive as challengers sense weakness. Labour's membership has reportedly decreased by 12,000 inches just 24 hours, with party headquarters describing donation cancellations as unprecedented in volume. The next 24 hours are absolutely critical for Britain's democratic future. The High Court will hear emergency applications from media organisations at 9 a.m. tomorrow, challenging the legality of the raids and seizures. Constitutional experts suggest the government is likely to face judicial defeat given established press protections in law. The question is no longer whether the government will retreat. It's how much institutional damage will occur before they do. The relationship between government, press and security services hangs in the balance. Britain is witnessing an extraordinary moment when press freedom itself has become the central political issue uniting opposition across traditional divides. This crisis will be studied for generations as a critical test of Britain's democratic institutions. At its centre stands a Prime Minister who apparently authorised security services to target journalists, then approved armed raids when his actions were exposed. Not since the 1,982nd Spycatcher case has the relationship between government secrecy and press freedom been so dramatically contested. Constitutional experts warn that rebuilding trust between government and media could take years. The independence of public broadcasters has been fundamentally challenged. International press freedom organisations have placed Britain under emergency monitoring protocols, typically reserved for countries experiencing democratic backsliding. And ordinary Britons are left wondering whether they can trust either the government's commitment to democratic norms or the media's ability to hold power accountable without facing armed raids. As court challenges proceed and public opinion solidifies against government overreach, Britain stands at a crossroads of democratic accountability that will define Starmer's place in history. So here's the question that matters. Is this the end of Starmer's premiership, or can he survive Britain's most serious press freedom crisis in decades? Did the government genuinely believe its actions were justified, or did it panic when its surveillance of journalists was exposed? And will this crisis permanently reset the relationship between government and media in Britain? What do you think? Has Britain's international reputation for press freedom been irreparably damaged, or will institutional safeguards ultimately protect journalistic independence? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and if this story shocked you as much as it shocked us, share it with everyone who needs to see what's really happening in Westminster right now. The mainstream media won't tell you the full implications of this unprecedented attack on press freedom, but we will. Next week, we'll reveal exclusive insider accounts from journalists who were present during the raids, and the extraordinary measures some took to protect their sources and materials. You won't believe what happened when armed officers demanded access to the BBC's protected source database.